Welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, thanks for watching. Well, what about this? School vouchers, funding for schools, student mental issues for school safety, that's coming up. But first, we have an exclusive interview with the state's Auditor General, and boy, do we have some big topics to chat about with him.
This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers, a fast-paced, unrehearsed weekly discussion with and about the leaders who shape your world. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Welcome back to the program. Well, joining me and sitting opposite me is Eugene DePasquale, as I like to say. I'm getting that.
You're getting the pronunciation.
I'm getting the ethnic part of it out. He's the Pennsylvania Auditor General. He's responsible for making sure that every dollar the state is spent wisely and legally. Did I get that right?
Legally and effectively.
Legally and effectively. Oh, yeah, you can't be responsible for the legislature.
I got enough problems to worry about that.
I got it. All right, well, let's start with a couple of important things. I think right now there's nothing more important in this state than school safety, right, as we have seen. Right. And you're involved with a task force with Governor Wolf, and there are other people on it. Right. But the big point is, what is it that you're trying to find out?
Well, a couple things. Number one is, obviously, post-Parkland, the governor and I decided to create a task force where we're traveling all over the state. Tragically, the Santa Fe shooting happened in between, and we also know there's other issues going on. We've had 4 of 6 meetings across the state, and then we're going to put forward a report that basically shows what we've heard from students, parents, teachers, administrators, to try to create an action plan for the legislature on what needs to be done to make our schools safer.
Yeah, I mean, is there any indication from your, I mean, what's the big takeaway? I mean, I won't hold you to it, but, you know, you listen to people, what is it that they're saying?
Look, obviously, when it comes to issues like guns and other issues, people are all over the map. What do you do to make the actual building safer? But the one thing that there is absolute unanimous agreement on is that mental health for our kids is an absolute crisis and a priority. And this is something that I didn't even anticipate, even though I have 2 teenage kids. One of the things I didn't anticipate is how many kids, when I say kids, young, some cases, young adults, feel detached from society because of social media. That how much pressure social media adds to their day-to-day lives.
Good point. And you know, there's a whole bunch of proposals in the legislature, and you're a former lawmaker, you pay attention to this, about what the deal about gun control in general, you know, background checks for you buy a gun at a gun show, there's other considerations about mental health, and I mean, we go on and on. From your sense, is there anything likely to be done, given, and some of it has bipartisan support?
I do think on the gun issue, I do think there's some consensus for people that have, like, the PFAs against them, domestic abuse. I do think there's a growing consensus on that, and so, but I don't want to take away that issue from the school safety. But what we're coming to grips with is, if we don't deal with the mental health of the kids that are in the school, the ones that then come in and really pull out a gun and do something tragic, if we don't tackle the mental health issue, we're going to be in trouble no matter what the issue is. But I do think on the gun issue, the one area that seems to be growing the consensus is the domestic abusers and the people with the PFAs against them. I think there's going to be a consensus that they shouldn't be armed.
Yeah, I mean, there's no discussion, and I think we have a big sports person state here with hunting and fishing and all of that. So we're not going to be banning assault. That won't have bipartisan support, right?
No, I think if you look at the polling in Pennsylvania, you know, an assault weapon ban, I'm sure if it were on the ballot, it would pass. But there's no way right now, at least the Republican-controlled legislature is going to pass it.
All right, you also are heavily involved in a, is it a state study of child? Go ahead.
So, you know, we've been on this show before talking about this, or I have been.
Sure.
You know, we found our audit 2 years ago where there was 58,000 unanswered phone calls at the child abuse hotline. Then I came out with a report called The State of the Child, which really talked about how the child welfare system in Pennsylvania is broken. What we came out last week was my action plan for how to fix it. We have to reduce the number of cases caseworkers have. We have to fix the funding stream. And if we don't tackle opioids in the family, then our kids are going to continue being in danger.
For our viewers, you and I have talked about this before. What is the situation with handling child abuse complaints? Go ahead.
Right, so right now, people will either call this hotline or they'll call their county. And right now, the caseworkers are working on sometimes 30 cases at a time. You know, you're talking about between 70 and 90% turnover. We have in some counties, literally some counties, caseworkers who sometimes have master's degrees on food stamps because the pay is so poor. And you also
Really?
Yes, in Clarion County. I'm not doing this to knock Clarion County.
No, I know.
Their caseworkers are on food stamps if they're not living at home with their parents with a master's degree.
Caseworkers?
Not the actual people in need.
I understand.
The actual caseworkers are on food stamps.
That's a new one. All right, we're going to run to a break. When we come back, there are a couple of other things, health care. And I got to ask you about the legalization of marijuana. You and I have also chatted about this over the past couple of years. We'll be back with the Auditor General of the state following these messages.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania State Education Association and Partners for Public Education, bringing the power of a great education to our schools, our students, and our communities. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Please visit pahighwayinfo.org. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Welcome back to the program with Eugene DePasquale. He's the Pennsylvania Auditor General. He lives in York. It's like it's the center of the universe. I have to take a light moment. We've got the governor's from York, the Republican candidate, Scott Wagner's from York, and Richard Nixon's parents lived in York in the late 40s and early 50s. Did you know that?
I did know that. And also,
I can't tell you anything.
And also John Fetterman, who's a Democratic nominee for lieutenant governor, born in York, but now, lives in the Pittsburgh area, Braddock, And I tell people we have a secret sauce, but we're not sharing it.
Yeah, okay, that's good. All right, before we leave the child abuse thing, there's some other conditions that support what you've just said.
Well, one of the things we got to do is we also have to have better coordination, and this is where the state police need more resources because they're doing their best. We've got to have better coordination with local law enforcement and the caseworkers because sometimes the caseworkers are going into situations that they desperately need police backup because it's a very volatile situation. And here's how volatile it can be. The Luzerne County CYS building was actually bombed. With three Molotov cocktails from a parent that wasn't happy with a caseworker decision.
I'll tell you, there are a lot of issues that all of us talk about routinely with state government. Nothing can be more important than child abuse.
Absolutely.
I mean, if we can't protect our kids,
what are we as a society?
Yeah, you're exactly right. All right, talking about another important subject, we're dealing with the changes in health care that are produced by the federal government's policies and implementation of policies. Who does that affect? First of all, what are the changes and who's affected by it?
The uncertainty at the federal level because of Obamacare. And I know that there's people on both sides of this issue. Without going into that, the fact is the feds have not settled on a policy one way or the other. And it's doing a couple things. Number one is you have insurers pulling out of the exchanges. That's number one. You have now an increased cost in health care, and the people that are the most vulnerable are the working poor families and their kids because of the Medicaid expansion being so vulnerable right now.
Right. All right. I can't let you go without talking about the legalization of marijuana. Is it 2 years ago or 3?
It was 2 years ago,
2 years ago, you and I talked about it, and you came out in support of the legalization of marijuana. Whether you're for it or against it, I think its time is coming. But go ahead. Why are you supporting it?
Well, a couple things. First of all, we saw the states that had already legalized. Colorado, Oregon, California, some other states, and we saw a couple things. Number one is drop in opioid addiction in those states. Drop in opioid addiction. Yes. Number two, in the states that, and I think Colorado is the best example for this, actually a reduction in teen use. And number three, if you just judge by we're 2.5 times the size of Colorado, we would pull in $350 million in revenue.
Oh my gosh.
So you think about it, more revenue, less people in prison for something that I don't think anyone views today as a hardened crime, reduce teen use, and a drop in opioid addiction. Now, again, I recognize that it's a controversial issue.
And there's still some
sides.
issues, I think, with whether it's a gateway drug, what is it? I mean, there's still some other issues.
The biggest issue, I will say, and to me, the science is clear, but I know there's still controversy, but the science is clear that it's not a gateway drug.
Okay.
But having said that, the biggest challenge we have right now is on driving under the influence, because we don't have an adequate test yet. When you're driving with alcohol intoxication, there are adequate testing. We don't have an adequate enough test for driving intoxicated with marijuana use, because obviously that's unacceptable.
All right. Well, look, I want to thank you for coming in. You're always welcome here, and we'll get you in a month or two to check up on your audits and what you're doing. All right. As I indicated, school vouchers, teacher shortage. We'll get back to the mental issues with students with a couple of folks who are experts on it, because they represent a bunch of people who actually run the schools in our state, and we'll do that in a moment.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Credit Union Association. Pennsylvania Credit Unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, check out ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Association of Pennsylvania State College and University Faculties, representing the faculty and coaches who are devoted to providing quality public higher education for Pennsylvania's college students.
Well, welcome back to the program. Joining me, as I indicated in the promo, are the folks who actually run the Pennsylvania schools, the 500 school districts. Sitting across from me is Dr. Mark DiRocco. He's the executive director of the Pennsylvania Association of School Administrators, and next to him is John Callahan. He's the chief advocacy officer for the Pennsylvania School Boards Association. John, let's pick up on what I was talking to the Auditor General about school safety. That has to be top of mind right now.
It's the biggest issue, obviously, out there with the tragedies that are going on in Florida and Texas. But I got to say, I mean, it has been a top priority for a very long time for schools. Yeah. I mean, when you send your child to a school, you put them on the bus or her on the bus, you expect them to come back and have a safe and good day at school. Yeah. And that's a top priority for administrators, for everybody.
What are the discussions about what to do?
Well, I know there's a variety.
Go ahead. I just had the Auditor General in here, and I'm actually serving on the task force along with him, the governor, and several other individuals. But you know, the three main areas that we've been focusing on in those discussions is, first and foremost, he mentioned mental health. We need more services for our students in schools. If you take a look at the studies that have been done by the Secret Service, the FBI, once students have a plan of violence in their head, if they can get access to weapons, chances are they're going to carry it out. So we have to take a look at ways to try to intercede with students before they get to that point where they have a plan of violence that they want to come and take some kind of action against someone who they believe has done something to them.
You know what's fascinating? When after Parkland there was this big discussion about whether teachers should be armed. And everybody I've interviewed in the profession itself are really leery of arming teachers, not bringing professionals in, security and create. What's your sense about that?
We would advise against that. I mean, there's so much more that you can do. Mental health wise, you can talk about your building itself and the security
what to do with it.
You can do training. I mean, training is one thing that we recommend over and over. I mean, training from your active shooter training to what schools should do and how you recognize bullying and dealing with all those issues. Right. There's no one thing that you can do to stop this issue, but there are multiple tools out there for you to deploy to actually address and start kind of blocking this issue.
With the multiple things that could go wrong with teachers carrying weapons or storing weapons in the classroom, we think that may end up causing more problems than it solves.
You'd be better off with professionals who, security that you hire, like we have security on the campuses, at Franklin and Marshall. They do a great job. I mean, All right, let's move on. I have so many things and so little time to get into it. Now, there's a bill in the legislature that would, in effect, create a voucher system where people could take the money, decide what school they would go to, and I think we're talking about moving the students away from the public schools into some form of private school education. What's your sense about that?
Well, we think that passage.
You can't be loud about it.
No, that was unfortunate to say the least. We are adamantly opposed to Senate Bill 2 and the education savings accounts because they are backdoor vouchers. Make no mistake, that's taking public dollars and putting it in some kind of a vehicle so it can go to a private school. There's no accountability for that from the public. And perhaps the worst part of that bill is we're going to take the districts that are struggling the most to educate their kids and pull money from their subsidy to give it to these people through the voucher system and let that go to a private school. So the very districts that need the most resources and need the most assistance and need the most help are going to have money pulled away from them. And we just think that's an inappropriate way to go as far as educating kids.
All right, you're part of, obviously, the folks who we elect in this state to run the schools, right? The school directors. What's your sense?
We had, school boards can actually pass resolutions and state positions on things. We have over 240 resolutions across the state of school boards that spoke up and said, we are opposed to this. And, Mark's right. This is really targeted at lower performing, struggling schools, which need our help, need our financial help, need our support. They don't need funds removed from them. And let me kind of get into that. I mean, the students that would get this would get a voucher that goes to another school. But when you take those students out of that school, there are still hard costs. You still need the teachers, you still need the buildings. The costs don't go down. You're just removing that subsidy from the school that needs it the most in Pennsylvania.
Right,
and I think that's tragic.
We're going to run to a break, and when we come back, I want to talk about the funding issue in general, and if we have some time, about school performance, and you get these studies that take a look at it, and the testing output, and we can get into that and some other things.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Medical Society. Inspired physicians committed to the good health of Pennsylvanians and the advancement of the practice of medicine. And by the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association, the future of long-term care.
Well, we couldn't chat with these folks who represent us, who actually run the schools, the 500 school districts in our state, without talking about money, right? You wouldn't expect to be able to come on. And so I'll start with you, Mark. Funding. Now, funding has certainly increased overall with Governor Wolf's proposals, and the legislature, it's been a high priority even for many lawmakers. So what's your sense now about the funding? What's the needs?
Well, we understand the governor and the legislature are in a tight spot. There's limited revenues as to what they can put together, but we're appreciative of the $100 million that's in the budget for increased subsidy and the $20 million in increased subsidy for special education. Unfortunately, for school boards and superintendents who are putting their budgets together, they'll put more than that out. Just with pension payments, increased cost of charter schools, and increased cost in special education. So consequently, before they even sign up on
So you're saying, before you go away, no, I want you to stay on this point. We're talking about fixed costs that the schools don't really, that you administer, you don't have much to say
let me
about.
make it more clear in numbers. So there's going to be about $100 million in new subsidy coming to school districts. Districts across the state will pay more than $120 million in just pension cost alone, on top of any increase in charter school costs and on top of any other increases in district. Special ed costs are exploding across districts all across the Commonwealth. And consequently, they're usually at a deficit by the time they sit down to put their budget together, which then sometimes leads to the need for a tax increase.
Right. I want to get to school performance, which is maybe related to this, but give me your take on it.
On performance or the budgeting?
Let's stick with the budget.
The budgeting, we've got, one of the good examples is pension. It's a fixed cost from the state that you have to pay. You're going, 6 years ago we were at 2% of total budgets. Now we're up to about 10% of a total budget. Now 10% when you're talking about your home budget is usually what you try to keep your mortgage at, how much you're paying. And so that's a big bill. It sucks up most of your budget. That's the same thing. It shouldn't be that way because
I'm going to throw you both a curveball.
I love it.
Get rid of the property tax. It's something like $13 billion. We can argue about that. Most school officials say it's predictable. If we go to state income or sales tax, and when we have a down economy, then that makes the situation even more. Reforming it's one thing, but getting rid of it, I can't imagine that either of you. Go ahead.
No school board member wants to vote to increase their neighbor's taxes.
Right.
I mean, nobody wants to take that vote. Plus, you might not even be around next time the election comes around if you take that kind of thing.
But it is a stable tax.
Absolutely. It is stable, and the concern that we have with several of the pieces of legislation that are proposed out there about eliminating property taxes is what replaces that, and is that going to be as stable as property taxes so districts can count on those revenues to educate their kids.
And it comes back to that budgeting issue. We have some fixed costs that are going up substantially. They go up faster than the cost of living in many cases, like pension, special ed, that are out of the control of school districts, frankly. And when you have that increase on there, and you build into a tax replacement bill, a cost of living, it doesn't work math-wise.
School performance. We have all these evaluations and tests that get done repeatedly by different, where does all that stand?
Well, I think our larger concern is that there seems to be this general perception in the public that public schools aren't doing well, and that somehow private schools or parochial schools are doing better than public schools. When the fact of the matter is, public schools in Pennsylvania, we have a higher graduation rate than any time in the history of public school education. We're sending more kids on to higher education than any time in our history. Our test scores are usually in the top quartile across the nation, whether you're looking at the NAEP or other standardized testing measures. So public education has never been stronger in Pennsylvania. Our kids are doing extraordinarily well. And despite the financial challenges that many districts have had over this last decade since the Great Recession, they continue to increase in performance and increase the amount of kids that are graduating and going on to higher education.
Take a crack at it.
I think there's this natural inclination, and we've backed it up by polling, that you look at your school district, my school district's doing well, but the rest of them, they're not doing well. But that can't be further from the truth. A majority of our school districts in Pennsylvania are doing incredibly well at educating kids. So many successes out there. It's just, I think, we just do our jobs. We do what we need to do with students, and we often forget to tell the story. And I think that's our challenge out there with public education, is telling the story that we have a ton of successes.
All right, we're just about out of time, and I think this is these are important subjects. I mean, you folks represent the people who, first of all, are elected to run the schools, and you got the responsibility for day-to-day, right? You got to run the day-to-day stuff, but thanks for coming on. All right, we'll see you next week for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, stay well.